much, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to bring us home here today on the debate on Bill 278 and the important public policy discussion started by our colleague from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke. I find it quite interesting to hear the NDP and the Liberals in this debate. The Liberal speaker who just preceded me suggested, well, everything is fine in terms of lobbyist registries and the regulations and everything don't need to be updated. This coming after literally 2 months of scandal related to intensive lobbying efforts by SNC-Lavalin to actually change the course of justice in Canada that has led us to the largest political scandal in Canadian history. In fact, the OECD is having a group look at the SNC-Lavalin affair, an international body that has never investigated Canada before for rule of law concerns. And that all stems from lobbying that commenced 4 months into the current government that led to the insertion of the remediation agreements provisions into the Budget Implementation Act, an omnibus bill, Madam Speaker. That lobbying was all above board and correct. But to dismiss concerns about needing to make sure our lobbying registries are the most current and the most effective in the world is a false argument at a time where we've been consumed by a scandal that at its center was the government advancing the interests of a private corporation. But I also have to say, my friend from Timmins, James Bay, who when he stood up had a piece of paper in his hand that looked like the bill, clearly had not read the bill, and he went on a rant about a lot of his old nuggets from the Harper government days and started talking about grassroots efforts, Madam Speaker. And we know that, you know, money that may come from foreign sources or from unions or others are not truly grassroots efforts, Madam Speaker. And at the very minimum, we should expect full transparency disclosure of any monies that are going in to influence public discourse, public debate, and the review of legislation in Canada. Why do I say that, Madam Speaker, and why is Bill C-278 critical at this time in our history? Let me quote the Minister of Foreign Affairs today at the G7 in Europe. She said this, quote, "Interference is very likely, and we think there have probably already been efforts by malign foreign actors to disrupt our democracy," end quote. That is the Liberal minister speaking today at the G7 about foreign influence in elections and democracies, Madam Speaker. That is why my colleague brought Bill C-278. So the last Liberal speaker should get on the phone to her minister to either correct her or perhaps to say to her House Leader, you know, we need to support what the Conservatives are doing to make sure that we're preventing interference. Madam Speaker, Bill C-278 does two discrete and very easy to understand things, Madam Speaker. It requires lobbyists to disclose the source of their funding, and it also requires lobbyists to disclose the intention of those foreign funds and of those lobbying efforts to influence proceedings in Canada, be they regulatory proceedings on pipeline review, Madam Speaker, be they legislative proceedings on the legalization of cannabis, which last I checked, most Liberal operatives seem to be working in that industry these days, Madam Speaker. All that will do will bring disclosure. What is wrong with a little sunshine, Madam Speaker? In fact, we have this new chamber that allows a bit of diffuse light in here. That diffuse, that opaque transparency is what we get from this Prime Minister, Madam Speaker. And why I find that the height of hypocrisy is because as a private member, the member for Papineau, who was not really known for doing much in this place before he became Prime Minister, and I respect the role he has, but his one private member's bill from the last session, and maybe my Liberal friends who were elected in 2015 don't know, was a bill called C-613. I always thought it was ironic it was the Ottawa area code, because it was meant to update access to information laws, Madam Speaker. He has talked about having transparency by default, Madam Speaker, in opposition. As Prime Minister, he's done the opposite. In fact, he hasn't lived up to one shred of the intention of his Bill 613. In fact, the last Information Commissioner chastised this Prime Minister for his conduct with respect to access to information. We've just today debated code words being used within this government to delay disclosure in the Norman affair. We've heard ATIs asked for by La Presse won't be available from this government on the SNC matter until after the election, Madam Speaker. There's been zero transparency from this Liberal government, this Prime Minister, and the small group of people around him. Let me say why this sunshine is needed and why particularly I'm concerned that we seem to be fine with not tracking foreign money in our country, Madam Speaker. I'd invite members, including Liberal and NDP, to watch Wendy Mesley's interview with Vivian Krause and Fair Questions. Because in the US there is disclosure of tax records, of foundation reports to the IRS, of unions' disclosure for money spent on the legislative process, she's able to analyze US documentation to track spending of money in Canada. In fact, it should very much concern Canadians, including in my province, where in the Great Recession, when the auto industry was on edge, the resource industry in Western Canada led to more jobs than auto in Ontario, Madam Speaker. People in Durham, in my community, should be concerned that the Rockefeller Foundation, the Tides Foundation, and the Hewitt Trust were part of a corporate ethics campaign to, in their words, and I'm quoting, landlock Canadian oil. End quote, Madam Speaker. In fact, they were putting and siphoning money into Canada, into activist groups, into activities to actually stop regulatory proceedings with respect to resource development and getting those products to market, Madam Speaker. Thereby, last year alone, meaning our national interest had $15 billion less in the world price for oil because of a deflated price that has hurt Alberta immensely, Madam Speaker. And that is less tax revenue that we can spend on things at the provincial and federal level that matter to Canadians. I think people should know if some of those projects are being delayed, canceled, or even influenced by foreign money coming in. So what is wrong with a little disclosure, Madam Speaker, particularly from a Prime Minister who said transparency should be the default setting in government, Madam Speaker? But today we hear from the Liberals, well, the regulatory process is in order, this bill's not needed. Yet in Europe, the minister is saying there's likely interference going on now with respect to our parliamentary democracy and our election this fall. 278 is intended to address that. Let's at least get it to committee so we can talk about this. Because I'll tell you, go on social media, go on Twitter, that probably keep most of us up at night because of the terrible environment. I think the last clerk of the Privy Council called it a vomitorium, Madam Speaker. The influence of paid operatives on Twitter may have influenced other elections before ours. Should we not know if some of those foreign influences are paying organizations on the ground here in Canada to impact Canadians and our decisions on our resources, on our projects, on our infrastructure, on whether Indigenous Canadians will be able to benefit from resources on traditional lands, Madam Speaker? It's impacting our Indigenous peoples, it's impacting our democracy. So Bill 278 is a modest proposal. I know the grassroots members of the NDP will survive without foreign money. They should support this bill. If the Liberal members listen to their own minister today talking to G7 leaders about interference by foreign actors in political elections, the Liberals should also support this bill, and that's why I want to thank the member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke for bringing it to Parliament.